morning, Garden family. My name is Eric Cheng, and I'm here today to share my ambassador testimony about what might be the most difficult mission field of all, at least for me, our own families. Like many of you, I grew up in a non-Christian home. My siblings and I found Christ as kids thanks to the outreach of extended family and a local church youth group, and my mom eventually accepted Christ over a decade ago. But my dad has always been a tough nut to crack. He's self-sufficient, logical to a fault, and like the typical Asian dad, not really one to talk about his feelings. In high school, the two of us butted heads a lot. He was often hostile toward my faith, and I resented him for it. But as I entered adulthood, I learned to forgive him, and I felt compassion and a conviction to share my faith, but didn't really know how to approach him. In person, he mainly wanted to talk about the news and other kind of factual things. And when I was away, which was most of the time, he would never respond to any of my emails or text messages. Still, I dutifully wrote my dad's name down on my PCS3 card every Easter, and especially this year, the year of the ambassador. But I honestly didn't have high hopes. Flash forward to a couple months ago, all of a sudden my sister and brother began a lengthy text conversation expressing concern about my dad's health and wondering what we should do. And at this point, I hadn't even heard that anything was wrong. Turns out that my dad had been steadily declining over the past month. And what began as a swollen knee led to my dad growing weak, barely eating or drinking anything, and eventually becoming completely bedridden. And to make matters worse, my parents insisted on only getting treatment from an acupuncturist who convinced them not to go see a regular doctor. And that was actually why my mom didn't tell me what was going on. You see, I'm a physician, and she didn't want my quote-unquote Western medical opinion. So I was initially very angry at the acupuncturist and frustrated with my parents for being so easily misled and not seeking proper medical care. But eventually, I came to the realization that arguing with my parents was counterproductive. I surrendered my desire to be right, and instead, I learned to simply pray for my dad's healing by any means God would work through, whether medicine, acupuncture, or even supernatural healing. I recruited others to help intercede for my dad, and as I look around, I see a bunch of you. The Wednesday evening prayer crew, my GIA community group, and the praise team that I serve with. A week later, I got a random Saturday morning phone call from my mom, excitedly screaming, "A miracle just happened. Your dad just asked me to pray for him. I told him we should call you to have his son pray for him too." And this was a huge breakthrough. You don't understand. My dad had never once asked for prayer in his entire life. And so when I shared this with Pastor David, he identified that this was a kairos moment in my dad's life and encouraged me to lean in to pray not just for his healing, but for his salvation. The following week, concerned that my dad might actually be dying, my siblings and I gathered together at my parents' home in Northern California. We helped my mom to take care of him, and I was actually able to convince them to let me prescribe a medicine to help relieve his knee pain and swelling. But more importantly, I had the opportunity to have meaningful conversations with my dad and to lay hands on him to cry out for healing. And while I was still there, my wife Mindy told me about Pastor David's sermon on the power of testimony that week. The story of Sister Cindy's father coming to faith in his final days convinced me that I too needed to be bold and upfront with a gospel invitation to my dad and to stop beating around the bush. Who knew when or even if I'd get another chance? So on my final morning before returning home, I found myself alone in the room with my dad. I asked him, after hearing about Christianity all these years, what his own thoughts were. He said that he kind of got some of it, but there was a lot he still didn't understand. And I told him that you don't have to understand every single detail to accept Christ. It's okay to have doubts as long as we bring them to God. And speaking of doubts, did I mention that my dad's name is actually Thomas? So I explained that the basic gospel message is pretty simple. God made us. He wants us to have a loving relationship with him. However, because of our human nature, we sinned and broke that relationship. And so God had to send Jesus to pay the price of our sin by his death on the cross to restore a relationship with him. And all we need to do is say yes to God's offer, receive his free gift of salvation, and give our lives back to him. So I asked my dad, does that make more sense to you now? And without hesitation, he clearly said yes. And I then had the privilege of leading my dad through the sinner's prayer. And now his name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life. Just wanted to show two quick pictures. So there's a photo of me with my mom and my dad, and then another one of my dad with my siblings. And, you know, I think the smile on his face tells the whole story. There's that joy coming out of him. And just so a brief epilogue to the story, my dad actually celebrated his 81st birthday a week and a half ago. And since then, his health has been steadily improving. He can get around with a walker. He's using a regular toilet again. He eats his meals at the kitchen table now instead of in bed. And whenever I ask him to pray together, he eagerly responds. But the one thing he really missed, though, was taking a shower, since he couldn't make it upstairs to the master bathroom. At this past Wednesday's prayer meeting, the one Sister Sunny was sharing about, the Holy Spirit actually gave me a vision for my dad, and so I texted this to him to encourage him. Dad, when I was praying for you last night, I had a vision of heaven opening up over your head and warm raindrops falling down on your face. I believe God was giving you a shower from heaven. And then a little later, my mom texted me back, what a coincidence. Yesterday, he took his first shower in the master bathroom after the incidents. And you and I both know that was no coincidence at all. And so, you know, as we go to Thanksgiving, I'm so thankful that my dad's heart was softened by his illness and by his sense of helplessness. I'm thankful to all the prayer warriors who broke down his spiritual strongholds. And I'm thankful for Cindy's testimony, which gave me a real-life picture of what it would look like to invite my dad into saving faith in God's perfect timing. So as we all prepare to spend time with loved ones over Thanksgiving and Christmas, I encourage all of you to hold on to that ambassador mindset toward your own families. It's the long game for sure, but who knows when God will suddenly open up a window of opportunity, and you don't want to miss out. Thank you.